The words echoed through my smart home's hidden recording system as I sat frozen in my car in the garage, listening to my mother-in-law, Patricia Hartwell's voice carry from my own kitchen. "She's becoming quite the liability, Ryan. First, the incident with the knife. Now she's acting paranoid about everything. I think we need to discuss getting her some help before this gets worse." Her tone was clinical, calculated, as if she were diagnosing a problem that needed solving. What she didn't know was that every word was being captured by the very technology I'd installed to protect our home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The kitchen accident she referenced had happened 3 weeks ago during a family dinner I'd spent hours preparing. A simple slip while dicing vegetables had resulted in a deep cut on my palm that required 7 stitches. But according to Patricia, it was evidence of my deteriorating mental state, my inability to handle basic responsibilities, and my growing instability as a wife. What really happened that night was far different from the narrative she was spinning. To my husband Ryan, and now I had proof of just how far she was willing to go to paint me as unfit. I'd been Patricia's target since the day Ryan brought me home to meet his family 4 years ago. Back then, I was Kate Morrison, a data analyst, for a growing tech company in downtown Denver, someone who'd built her career on attention to detail and problem-solving. I was proud of my work, my independence, and my ability to navigate complex systems both digital and personal. Patricia saw me as an intruder in her carefully constructed family dynamic, someone who threatened her role as the primary woman in her son's life. My journey into the Hartwell family began on a crisp October morning when I was hired to consult on the security systems for Ryan's real estate development company. He was expanding his business into smart home technology, and my expertise in data security made me the perfect candidate to ensure their systems were bulletproof. Ryan Morrison was different from the other developers I'd worked with, polished but not pretentious, successful but still grounded. He had sandy brown hair that always looked slightly disheveled from running his hands through it when he was thinking, and green eyes that lit up when he talked about his projects. Our first meeting was supposed to last an hour but stretched into 3 as we discussed not just security protocols, but everything from Denver's booming tech scene to our shared love of hiking in the Rocky Mountains. There was an easy chemistry between us, a natural flow of conversation that made me forget this was a business meeting. When he asked if I'd like to continue our discussion over dinner, I said yes without hesitation. Ryan was passionate about sustainable development and had dreams of creating communities that balanced modern living with environmental responsibility. His current project was a series of eco-friendly homes in Littleton, complete with solar panels, smart energy systems, and mountain views that took your breath away. As we toured the model home on our second date, I found myself imagining what it would be like to live in one of these spaces, to wake up every morning to the sight of snow-capped peaks in the distance. 6 months into our relationship, Ryan suggested it was time to meet his family. The Hartwells lived in Cherry Hills Village, one of Denver's most exclusive neighborhoods, in a sprawling ranch-style home that had been in the family for 3 generations. Robert Hartwell, Ryan's father, was a retired investment banker with silver hair and a firm handshake who seemed genuinely pleased to meet me. He asked thoughtful questions about my work and nodded approvingly when I explained how cybersecurity was becoming crucial in an increasingly connected world. Patricia Hartwell was a different story entirely. At 62, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Her silver hair was styled in a perfect bob that never seemed to move, and her clothing was always immaculate, coordinated down to her jewelry and nail polish. She'd spent 30 years as a high school principal before retiring, and it showed in the way she assessed people with sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalog every potential flaw. From the moment I walked into their home, Patricia's disapproval was palpable. She greeted me with a thin smile that never reached her eyes and immediately began what I would later recognize as her signature interrogation technique. Where was I from originally? What did my parents do for work? Had I attended college locally? Each question was delivered with polite interest, but I could feel the judgment behind every inquiry. When I mentioned that my father was a mechanic and my mother worked as a nurse, I saw something flicker across her face, a brief moment of calculation that told me I'd been found wanting. Dinner that first evening was an elaborate affair served in their formal dining room, complete with china that Patricia mentioned had been her grandmother's, and crystal glasses that caught the light from an ornate chandelier. The conversation flowed around topics I was unfamiliar with: charity galas Patricia had organized, family friends I'd never met, and investments Robert was monitoring. When Ryan tried to steer the discussion toward my work or our shared interests, Patricia would politely redirect to safer family territory. The warning signs were subtle but consistent. Patricia had a way of asking questions that sounded supportive but carried underlying criticism. It must be so demanding to work in such a male-dominated field. Do you find it difficult to balance career ambitions with personal relationships? Or, Ryan tells me you're quite independent. I do hope you'll be able to adjust to being part of a close family like ours. Each comment was delivered with a smile, making it impossible to object without seeming oversensitive. Ryan seemed oblivious to his mother's tactics, or perhaps he'd grown so accustomed to her behavior that he no longer noticed the subtle digs. When I mentioned feeling unwelcome, he assured me that Patricia just needed time to warm up, that she was protective of her family, but ultimately welcoming to those who proved themselves. I wanted to believe him, especially as our relationship deepened and we began talking about a future together. The proposal came 18 months after that first family dinner, during a weekend trip to Vail, where Ryan had rented a cabin overlooking the valley. We'd spent the day skiing and were sitting by the fireplace when he pulled out a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. It was a beautiful vintage piece with a central diamond surrounded by smaller stones, and when he asked me to marry him, I said yes without hesitation. I loved Ryan deeply, and I was confident that any issues with his family would resolve themselves over time. Planning our wedding became my first real test in navigating Hartwell family dynamics. Patricia immediately assumed control of the arrangements, presenting me with a thick binder of ideas she'd been collecting since Ryan was a child. The venue would be the Denver Country Club, where the family had been members for decades. The guest list would include 300 of their closest friends and business associates. The menu, flowers, music, and even my dress were all subject to Patricia's approval. When I suggested alternatives, a smaller ceremony at the Botanical Gardens, a menu that reflected both Ryan's and my preferences, or inviting some of my college friends who Patricia deemed inappropriate for the guest list, I was met with polite but firm resistance. "Darling," she would say, her voice dripping with condescension, "I understand you want to contribute, but planning events of this caliber requires experience. Why don't you focus on choosing your bridesmaids and leave the important details to those who know how these things are done?" Ryan supported his mother's involvement, arguing that she had connections and expertise that would ensure our wedding was perfect. He couldn't see, or chose not to see, how his mother's help was systematically erasing any trace of my personality from what should have been our special day. Every suggestion I made was politely dismissed. Every preference I expressed was overruled in favor of Hartwell family tradition. The wedding was indeed perfect by Patricia's standards. The Denver Country Club was decorated with white roses and greenery. The 5-course dinner was flawless, and the 3-piece jazz ensemble played all the appropriate classics. I felt like a guest at my own wedding, watching from the outside, as Patricia orchestrated every moment with military precision. During the reception, I overheard her telling friends about how she'd guided me through the planning process, how overwhelming it had been for someone from my background to understand the complexities of a proper society wedding. After the honeymoon, Ryan and I moved into one of his newly completed homes in Littleton. It was everything we'd dreamed of: an open floor plan with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the mountain views, a gourmet kitchen with top-of-the-line appliances, and a master suite with a private balcony. I loved the house immediately and threw myself into making it our home, installing smart home technology that could control everything from the lighting to the security system with voice commands or smartphone apps. This was where my professional expertise really shone. I designed a comprehensive security system that included cameras, motion sensors, and audio recording capabilities that could be activated remotely. The system was sophisticated enough to distinguish between normal household sounds and potential security threats, and it could store weeks of footage and audio on encrypted servers. Ryan was impressed by the technology and proud to show it off to friends and family as an example of the cutting-edge features his developments would soon include. What I didn't tell Ryan was that I'd also configured the system to record continuously in certain areas of the house, particularly the kitchen and living room where we entertained guests. After years of dealing with Patricia's subtle manipulations and gaslighting, I wanted a record of what was actually said during family visits. Too many times, I'd found myself questioning my own memory of conversations after Patricia would later claim things had been said differently or that I'd misunderstood her intentions. The first recordings were relatively benign, Patricia criticizing my decorating choices when she thought I was out of earshot, or making snide comments about my cooking to Ryan. But as months passed, the conversations became more pointed and strategic. I began to understand that Patricia wasn't just expressing disapproval, she was actively working to undermine my marriage and my relationship with Ryan. Family dinners at our house became a regular occurrence, usually initiated by Patricia calling Ryan directly to suggest they visit. She would arrive with Robert in tow, armed with subtle criticisms and helpful suggestions for how I could improve everything from my hostessing skills to my appearance. "Kate, darling, you really should consider updating your wardrobe now that you're a Hartwell. Presentation matters so much in Ryan's business circle," she would say while examining my choice of dinner plates or questioning my menu selections. The kitchen accident happened on a particularly stressful evening when both Ryan's parents and his sister Ashley with her husband Marcus were coming for dinner. I'd planned an elaborate meal featuring Colorado lamb with seasonal vegetables, homemade, bread, and a chocolate tart for dessert. I'd spent the entire day preparing, wanting everything to be perfect for once, hoping to prove that I could host a family dinner that would meet even Patricia's exacting standards. The afternoon had been filled with small disasters. The bread didn't rise properly, forcing me to start over. The lamb was taking longer to cook than expected, pushing back our dinner time. Ashley called to ask if she could bring a salad, which I interpreted as a lack of confidence in my meal planning. By the time I started chopping vegetables for the side dish, I was frazzled and running behind schedule. I was dicing onions quickly, trying to make up for lost time, when the knife slipped. The blade caught my palm just below my thumb, opening a deep gash that immediately began bleeding profusely. I cried out in pain and surprise, dropping the knife as blood splattered across the cutting board and counter. Ryan came running from the living room where he'd been setting up drinks, taking one look at my hand before grabbing a kitchen towel to apply pressure. The cut was deep enough to require stitches, and Ryan insisted on taking me to the emergency room immediately. I protested, worried about dinner and our guests who would be arriving within the hour. But the bleeding wouldn't stop, and the pain was intense. As we rushed out the door, I called Patricia to explain what had happened and ask if they could postpone dinner. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Patricia's response was telling. Instead of expressing concern for my injury, her first question was whether I'd been drinking. When I assured her I hadn't touched alcohol all day, she suggested that perhaps I'd been overwhelmed by the pressure of hosting and had rushed through my preparations carelessly. "These things happen when we take on more than we can handle," she said in a tone that managed to be both sympathetic and accusatory. "Why don't we postpone dinner until you're feeling more like yourself?" At the hospital, Ryan held my hand while the doctor cleaned and stitched the wound. 7 stitches and a prescription for antibiotics later, we headed home to find that Patricia had called Ashley and Marcus to cancel dinner, explaining that I'd had an incident in the kitchen and needed time to recover. When Ryan called to, check on the plans, Patricia suggested they order pizza instead and eat at her house, since I obviously wouldn't be up to cooking or entertaining. What bothered me most wasn't the injury itself, which was healing well, but the way the incident was discussed in the days that followed. Patricia began referring to it as my kitchen accident, with emphasis that made it sound like a pattern, rather than an isolated event. She would ask Ryan privately how I was handling things, and whether he'd noticed any other signs that I might be struggling with stress or anxiety. I started to realize that Patricia was building a narrative around my stability and competence, using the accident as evidence that I was overwhelmed by the responsibilities of being Ryan's wife. She began making subtle suggestions about ways I could simplify my life, perhaps by reducing my work hours, hiring help for household tasks, or seeking counseling to manage stress better. Each suggestion was presented as caring concern, but I could see the underlying message that I was failing to meet the standards expected of a Hartwell wife. This was when I began paying closer attention to the recordings from our security system. What I discovered was a calculated campaign of psychological manipulation that had been building for months. Patricia wasn't just expressing normal mother-in-law concerns. She was systematically working to isolate me from Ryan and position herself as the primary source of guidance and support in his life. The recordings revealed conversations between Patricia and Ryan that happened when I was supposedly out of earshot, discussions about my mental state, my suitability as a wife, and whether I was strong enough to handle the pressures of being part of their family. Patricia would plant seeds of doubt about my behavior, my decisions, and my emotional stability, then water them with carefully crafted observations and suggestions. As I sat in my car that morning, listening to Patricia's latest assessment of my mental health being transmitted through my own security system, I realized that the kitchen accident had become her smoking gun. In her narrative, it was proof that I was unstable, careless, and potentially dangerous to myself and others. She was using it to justify her concerns about my fitness as a wife and to push Ryan toward taking action to address my supposed problems. But Patricia had made one crucial mistake. She didn't know about the recordings, and she certainly didn't realize that her private conversations with Ryan were being captured and stored on encrypted servers that only I could access. For months, I'd been gathering evidence of her manipulation, her lies, and her deliberate attempts to undermine my marriage. Now, as I listened to her discuss my need for professional intervention and Ryan's need to consider his options, I knew it was time to use that evidence to protect myself and expose the truth about Patricia Hartwell's carefully constructed facade. The pattern of exclusion began subtly, so gradually that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. 3 days after the kitchen incident, Ashley called Ryan directly to invite him to lunch, mentioning casually that she wanted to discuss some family business that wouldn't interest me. When I asked Ryan about it later, he brushed it off as boring investment talk, but I noticed he seemed unusually quiet when he returned home that afternoon. Patricia's visits to our house increased in frequency, always timed for when she knew I'd be at work. I'd come home to find evidence of her presence: fresh flowers she'd brought for the kitchen, reorganized cabinets that she'd helped Ryan tidy up, or new additions to our home that she'd purchased without consulting me. A decorative bowl for the entryway, throw pillows for the living room, even a new coffee table book about Colorado history that happened to feature the Hartwell family name in several chapters about early Denver development. Each time I questioned these changes, Ryan would explain that his mother was just trying to be helpful, that she enjoyed contributing to our home because she cared about us. When I suggested that I'd prefer to be consulted before changes were made to our space, he seemed genuinely confused by my objection. "She's family, Kate. She's not going to do anything that isn't in our best interest," he would say, as if my desire for input was unreasonable. The recordings from these visits revealed a different story entirely. Patricia would arrive with specific agendas, using her time alone with Ryan to plant concerns about my behavior, my priorities, and my commitment to our marriage. She had a talent for presenting her observations as reluctant admissions, prefacing her criticisms with phrases like, "I hate to mention this, but," or, "I'm probably overreacting, however." One particularly revealing conversation happened on a Thursday afternoon when I was attending a cybersecurity conference downtown. Patricia had stopped by ostensibly to drop off some family photos she thought we'd enjoy, but the audio captured her real purpose. "Ryan, sweetheart, I've been worried about Kate lately," she began, her voice carrying that tone of maternal concern she'd perfected over the years. "She seems so tense whenever we're all together, almost defensive. And after that incident with the knife, I can't help but wonder if she's feeling overwhelmed by everything." Ryan's response was exactly what Patricia was hoping for. "She has been working a lot lately, and I know she puts pressure on herself to make everything perfect when you and Dad come over." I could hear the doubt creeping into his voice, the seed of concern that Patricia was so skillfully planting. "I just think," Patricia continued, "that sometimes people who aren't used to the kind of lifestyle we've always lived can struggle with the expectations. There's nothing wrong with that, of course, but it might explain why she seems so on edge all the time. Have you considered that she might benefit from talking to someone? A professional who could help her develop better coping strategies?" The conversation continued for nearly 20 minutes, with Patricia carefully building her case that I was struggling to adapt to married life, that my career was creating stress that was affecting our relationship, and that my accident-prone behavior was a symptom of deeper issues that needed addressing. By the end of their talk, Ryan was agreeing that he should pay closer attention to my stress levels and consider ways to help me feel more supported. When I arrived home that evening, Ryan greeted me with unusual attentiveness, asking detailed questions about my day and whether I was feeling overwhelmed by work. He suggested we hire a housekeeper to reduce my domestic responsibilities and offered to take over more of the cooking duties. His kindness was genuine, but it was based on Patricia's manufactured concerns rather than any real observation of my needs or desires. This pattern repeated itself over the following weeks. Patricia would visit while I was away, planting new seeds of doubt about my stability, my happiness, or my suitability as a wife. Then Ryan would come home with new suggestions for how to help me, solutions to problems I didn't actually have. When I tried to explain that I wasn't feeling overwhelmed or struggling with stress, my denials only seemed to confirm Patricia's assessment that I was too proud to admit I needed help. The family dynamics during group gatherings became increasingly uncomfortable as Patricia's campaign intensified. At Sunday dinners at the Hartwell house, I found myself subjected to careful observation disguised as friendly conversation. Patricia would ask probing questions about my work-life balance, my energy levels, and my general mood, analyzing my responses for signs of instability or unhappiness. Ashley, Patricia's daughter, had fully embraced her mother's concerns about my well-being. During one particularly uncomfortable dinner, she cornered me in the kitchen while I was helping clear dishes. "Mom mentioned you've been having a rough time lately," she said with false sympathy. "You know, when Marcus and I were first married, I really struggled with balancing everything. There's no shame in getting help when you need it." I stared at her, wondering what version of events Patricia had shared. "I'm not having a rough time," I replied carefully. "I'm actually doing very well at work, and Ryan and I are happy." Ashley's expression suggested she didn't believe me. "Sometimes, it's hard to see our own stress levels objectively," she continued. "Mom's really good at noticing when people are struggling, probably from all those years as a principal. She just wants what's best for Ryan, you know?" The implication was clear. Patricia's concerns were valid, my perception of my own mental state was unreliable, and Ashley was positioning herself as another voice supporting her mother's assessment. I realized that this wasn't just Patricia working alone to undermine me. she had enlisted Ashley as an ally in building the narrative that I was unstable and potentially harmful to Ryan's well-being. Meanwhile, the recordings captured increasingly frank discussions between Patricia and Ryan about my supposed deterioration. During one visit, Patricia brought up the topic of children, suggesting that perhaps we should wait to start a family until I was in a better place emotionally. She painted a picture of me as someone too fragile for the responsibilities of motherhood, too career-focused to prioritize family properly, and too proud to seek the help I clearly needed. "I know you love her," Patricia told Ryan during this conversation, "but love isn't always enough. Sometimes we have to make difficult decisions for everyone's benefit. Kate might actually be relieved to have less pressure on her, to be able to focus on getting better without worrying about maintaining appearances." Ryan's responses to these conversations troubled me more than Patricia's manipulations. Instead of defending me or questioning his mother's assessment, he seemed increasingly convinced that I was hiding my struggles from him. He began monitoring my behavior more closely, asking leading questions about my stress levels, and making suggestions that clearly originated from Patricia's playbook. One evening, he suggested I consider reducing my hours at work, or perhaps taking a sabbatical to focus on our relationship. When I asked where this suggestion had come from, he claimed he'd been thinking about it for weeks, concerned about how hard I'd been pushing myself. But I'd heard Patricia make almost identical suggestions during her previous visit, complete with the same phrases about focusing on what really matters and not being afraid to step back when we need to. The kitchen accident became Patricia's most powerful piece of evidence in her campaign against me. She referenced it constantly, using it to support her theories about my instability and carelessness. During family gatherings, she would ask about my hand with exaggerated concern, mentioning to others how frightening it had been to hear about my accident and how worried she'd been about my safety. More damaging was how she used the incident in private conversations with Ryan. The recordings captured her weaving the accident into a larger narrative about my declining mental state, presenting it as part of a pattern that included my defensiveness. During family gatherings, my reluctance to accept help, and my insistence on maintaining my demanding career despite obvious signs of stress. Accidents like that don't just happen, Patricia told Ryan during one particularly manipulative conversation. When someone is struggling emotionally, they become careless, distracted. The mind affects the body in ways we don't always recognize. I'm not saying Kate did it intentionally, but her subconscious might be telling us something important about how she's really feeling. This pseudo-psychological analysis was exactly the kind of reasoning that Patricia excelled at, presenting complex theories in language that sounded authoritative while being completely unfounded. She had a gift for taking normal events and reframing them as symptoms of deeper problems, creating doubt where none had existed before. The most insidious aspect of Patricia's campaign was how she isolated me from potential allies within the family. Robert, Ryan's father, had initially seemed genuinely warm toward me, but Patricia worked systematically to erode his support. During family dinners, she would share her concerns about my well-being with him, always framing her observations as worry rather than criticism. "I just think Kate is having a harder time adjusting than she wants to admit," Patricia would tell Robert, when she thought I couldn't hear. "You know how proud she is, how independent. It must be difficult for someone from her background to suddenly be part of a family with our traditions and expectations. The pressure might be more than she can handle." Robert, who genuinely cared about family harmony, began treating me with the careful kindness reserved for someone fragile. He stopped engaging me in the spirited discussions about business and politics that I'd enjoyed during my early visits, instead offering gentle platitudes and avoiding topics that might create stress. His withdrawal of intellectual respect was perhaps more painful than Patricia's open hostility. The recordings also revealed Patricia's efforts to influence Ryan's perception of our intimate relationship. During one visit, she managed to steer their conversation toward our marriage, expressing concern about whether I was truly happy in our relationship. She suggested that my focus on work might be a way of avoiding emotional intimacy, that my independence might actually be a sign of commitment issues rather than strength. Some people use career success to fill emotional voids, Patricia explained to Ryan with the confidence of someone who'd read a psychology article and appointed herself an expert. When someone throws themselves into work the way Kate does, especially after a traumatic incident like her accident, it might indicate that they're avoiding dealing with deeper issues. Have you noticed her pulling away from you emotionally? Ryan's initial response was to defend our relationship, but Patricia's persistent questioning began to plant seeds of doubt. She asked whether I seemed fully present during intimate moments, whether I talked to him about my feelings the way I had when we were dating, whether I seemed as excited about our future together as I had before we married. Her questions were designed to make Ryan analyze our relationship through a lens of suspicion, looking for problems that didn't exist. The impact of these conversations became evident in Ryan's behavior toward me. He began asking probing questions about my happiness, my satisfaction with our marriage, and my feelings about our future together. When I responded with confusion about why he was suddenly questioning our relationship, he would claim he just wanted to make sure I felt supported and understood. But his questions followed Patricia's script so closely that I could predict what he would ask next based on what I'd heard in the recordings. Patricia's masterpiece was her gradual introduction of the idea that I might need professional intervention. She never directly suggested that I was mentally ill or dangerous, but she painted a picture of someone struggling with adjustment disorders, stress-related issues, and possible depression that was affecting my judgment and behavior. She researched therapists who specialized in helping women adjust to major life changes, casually mentioning their names during conversations with Ryan. Dr. Sarah Chen has such a wonderful reputation for helping professional women find balance, Patricia mentioned during one visit, as if the thought had just occurred to her. She's helped several women I know who were struggling with similar issues transitioning from single career focus to married life. Sometimes an outside perspective can be incredibly valuable. The recordings captured Patricia's increasing frustration when her subtle approach didn't yield immediate results. Ryan was clearly influenced by her concerns, but he hadn't yet taken the decisive action she was hoping for. This led to more direct conversations about my fitness as a wife and partner, discussions that revealed the true extent of Patricia's ambitions. During one particularly revealing conversation, Patricia abandoned her usual diplomatic approach and spoke with startling candor about her goals. "Ryan, I love you too much to watch you settle for someone who can't give you what you deserve," she told him. "Kate might be a lovely person, but she's clearly not equipped for the kind of life you're meant to live." The accident was just a symptom of a larger problem: her inability to handle pressure, her resistance to family guidance, her prioritization of career over relationship. Patricia went on to suggest that Ryan deserved a partner who would embrace family traditions, support his business goals without the distraction of demanding career ambitions, and provide the kind of stable home environment that would allow him to thrive. She painted a picture of an alternative future where Ryan was married to someone more suitable, someone who understood his family's values and could contribute to their legacy rather than creating constant tension and concern. What struck me most about this conversation was Patricia's assumption that Ryan would ultimately choose family loyalty over marital commitment. She spoke as if my removal from the family was inevitable, as if it was simply a matter of providing Ryan with sufficient justification to make the necessary decision. Her confidence was chilling, suggesting that she'd successfully manipulated family situations before and expected to do so again. The recordings from this period also captured conversations between Patricia and Ashley that revealed the depth of their collaboration. Ashley served as Patricia's scout, reporting back on my behavior during family gatherings and confirming her mother's assessments of my instability. Together, they analyzed my responses to their questions, my body language during family dinners, and my interactions with Ryan, looking for evidence to support their predetermined conclusion that I was unsuitable for their family. "She definitely seems more defensive lately," Ashley reported during one conversation. When I asked about her work stress, she got all prickly and insisted everything was fine. Mom, you're right. She's not handling the pressure well at all. Patricia's response revealed her strategic thinking. The key is to make sure Ryan sees it for himself. We can point out concerning behaviors, but he needs to reach his own conclusions. Otherwise, he might feel like we're pressuring him unfairly. This collaboration between mother and daughter created an echo chamber where my every action was interpreted through the lens of their preconceptions. If I was friendly and outgoing, I was overcompensating for underlying problems. If I was quiet and reserved, I was withdrawing due to emotional instability. If I defended myself against their subtle attacks, I was being defensive and paranoid. There was no way to win because they had already decided on the outcome they wanted. As weeks passed, the psychological pressure of living under constant scrutiny began affecting me in ways that Patricia could then point to as evidence of her theories. I became hyper-aware of my behavior during family gatherings, second-guessing my responses to their questions and analyzing my own reactions for signs of the instability they kept suggesting I displayed. This self-consciousness created exactly the kind of tension and awkwardness that Patricia could then cite as proof of my deteriorating mental state. The irony wasn't lost on me that Patricia's campaign was creating the very problems she claimed to be observing. Her constant implications that I was struggling began to make me feel as if I actually was struggling. Her suggestions that I was defensive made me defensive. Her insinuations that I was pulling away from Ryan made me question whether I was being fully present in our relationship. But the recordings provided me with an anchor to reality, proof that my perceptions were accurate and that Patricia's concerns were manufactured rather than genuine. Each time I began to doubt myself, I could review the audio files and hear exactly how Patricia was manipulating situations, planting ideas, and building false narratives. The evidence was undeniable, and it strengthened my resolve to protect myself and my marriage from her toxic influence. The breaking point came during our family dinner at our house when Patricia's manipulation reached a new level of audacity. She had convinced Ryan to invite Dr. Sarah Chen, the therapist she'd been recommending, to join us for dinner as a family friend who just happened to be in the neighborhood. The setup was obvious to me, but Ryan seemed genuinely unaware of his mother's orchestration. Throughout dinner, Patricia steered the conversation toward topics that would allow Dr. Chen to observe my responses and behavior. She brought up my work stress, the kitchen accident, and my adjustment to married life, all while presenting herself as a caring mother-in-law who was simply concerned about my well-being. Dr. Chen, whether intentionally or not, found herself in the position of conducting an informal assessment of my mental state over appetizers and wine. That night, as I listened to the recorded conversation between Patricia and Ryan after our guests had left, I heard Patricia's true intentions revealed with crystal clarity. She had arranged Dr. Chen's visit as an intervention disguised as a social evening, hoping that a mental health professional would validate her concerns about my stability and recommend treatment. "I think Dr. Chen could see what we've been talking about," Patricia told Ryan as they cleaned up in the kitchen. "Did you notice how defensive Kate got when she mentioned work-life balance? And the way she kept changing the subject when we talked about the accident? Those are classic signs of someone who's struggling but too proud to admit it." Ryan's agreement with his mother's assessment was the final straw. "You're right, Mom. I love Kate, but I can't ignore what I'm seeing anymore. Maybe it's time to have a serious conversation about getting her some help." As I sat in my car the next morning, listening to Patricia discuss my need for intervention with the casual authority of someone planning a dinner menu, I realized that her campaign had reached its intended climax. She had successfully convinced Ryan that I was mentally unstable, potentially dangerous to myself, and in need of professional intervention that I was too proud or sick to seek on my own. But Patricia had made one crucial miscalculation. She had built her entire campaign on the assumption that I was unaware of her manipulations, that I would remain passive while she systematically destroyed my marriage and my reputation. She didn't know about the recordings, the evidence I'd been collecting, or the detailed documentation of every lie she'd told and every manipulation she'd attempted. What Patricia didn't realize was that her target wasn't the naive, trusting woman she'd assumed I was. I was a cybersecurity expert who understood the importance of documentation, evidence, and strategic planning. I had been building my own case, while she built hers, and now I had months of recorded proof of her deliberate campaign to undermine my marriage and destroy my relationship with Ryan. The time had come to use that evidence to expose Patricia's true nature and protect myself from her toxic influence. But I wasn't going to rush into confrontation without a plan. Just as Patricia had carefully orchestrated her campaign against me, I would carefully orchestrate my response, ensuring that when the truth finally came to light, it would be impossible for anyone to deny or explain away. The discovery that changed everything happened on a rainy Tuesday morning when Ryan left for an early meeting with investors, forgetting his laptop on the kitchen counter. I was preparing my usual coffee when I noticed the screen was still open to his email account, displaying a message thread that made my blood run cold. The subject line read, "Intervention Planning," and the sender was Dr. Sarah Chen, the therapist Patricia had introduced at our dinner. My hands trembled as I read the exchange between Ryan, Patricia, and Dr. Chen, discussing the logistics of staging what they called a loving intervention for my alleged mental health crisis. The emails revealed that Patricia had been in contact with Dr. Chen for weeks before the dinner, providing detailed accounts of my concerning behaviors and building a case for immediate professional intervention. Dr. Chen had agreed to attend the dinner as an informal assessment opportunity, and based on her observations, she had recommended proceeding with a formal intervention. The plan was laid out in clinical detail. Patricia had suggested holding the intervention at her house, where I would feel outnumbered and more likely to comply with their recommendations. They had researched residential treatment facilities that specialized in stress-related disorders and adjustment issues, with Patricia offering to handle the financial arrangements. Dr. Chen had provided scripts for family members to follow, emphasizing the importance of presenting a united front and maintaining firm boundaries if I resisted their help. What devastated me most was Ryan's enthusiastic participation in these plans. His emails expressed relief that they were finally taking action to address my obvious decline, and gratitude to his mother for recognizing the severity of my condition before he had. He wrote about feeling guilty for not seeing the signs sooner and his commitment to supporting whatever treatment plan the professionals recommended, even if it meant temporary separation while I focused on recovery. The emails contained attachments that revealed the full scope of their conspiracy. Patricia had created a detailed timeline of my alleged behavioral changes, starting with my obsessive focus on home security systems and culminating with the kitchen accident that she described as a self-harm incident disguised as clumsiness. She had documented every instance of what she called defensive behavior, social withdrawal, and inappropriate emotional responses, creating a compelling narrative of mental deterioration that bore no resemblance to reality. Dr. Chen had contributed professional language to legitimize Patricia's observations, diagnosing me with what she termed adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood, complicated by perfectionist tendencies and resistance to family integration. She recommended intensive therapy, possibly in a residential setting, to address what she saw as my inability to adapt to the expectations and responsibilities of married life within an established family system. Most chilling was the legal documentation they had prepared. Patricia had consulted with a family attorney about the possibility of having me declared temporarily incompetent to make decisions about my own care, especially if I refused the treatment they were proposing. The lawyer had outlined the process for emergency mental health intervention in Colorado, including the criteria that would need to be met and the documentation required to support such a drastic step. As I read through email after email detailing their plans for my future, I realized that Patricia's campaign had evolved far beyond simple family manipulation. She was orchestrating what amounted to a sophisticated form of psychological abuse, using professional credentials and legal procedures to legitimize her desire to remove me from Ryan's life permanently. The intervention wasn't designed to help me recover from problems I didn't have. It was designed to establish a legal and medical record that would support her narrative of my unfitness as a wife. The most damaging discovery was a series of emails between Patricia and Ashley discussing the long-term implications of my treatment. They openly speculated about how long my recovery might take, with Patricia suggesting that extended treatment would give Ryan time to reassess his priorities and remember what kind of life he really wanted. Ashley contributed her own observations about how much happier Ryan seemed when I wasn't around, how much more relaxed family gatherings were when I was absent, and how natural it felt when they functioned as they had before I joined the family. These emails revealed that the intervention was never intended to result in my return to the family as a healthy, integrated member. Instead, it was designed to create enough separation and doubt that Ryan would eventually decide that our marriage had been a mistake. Patricia and Ashley discussed potential grounds for divorce, including mental health issues that would make me an unfit wife, and they speculated about how to minimize any financial settlement I might be entitled to receive. The correspondence also revealed Patricia's backup plans if the intervention approach failed. She had researched private investigators who could document what she called my erratic behavior in professional settings, hoping to build a case that my mental health issues were affecting my work performance and creating liability for my employer. She had even considered approaching my colleagues to inquire about my stability and reliability, planning to present herself as a concerned family member seeking to understand the full scope of my problems. Reading these emails felt like discovering that my entire reality had been carefully constructed to serve someone else's agenda. Every family interaction, every seemingly innocent conversation, every expression of concern had been part of a calculated effort to isolate me and build a case for my removal. Patricia hadn't just been undermining my marriage, she had been systematically destroying my credibility, my relationships, and my sense of reality itself. But even as I absorbed the shocking extent of their betrayal, I recognized that this discovery was also an opportunity. Patricia's emails contained explicit admissions of manipulation, deliberate deception, and coordinated efforts to have me declared mentally incompetent against my will. Dr. Chen's correspondence revealed that her assessment had been based on biased information provided by Patricia rather than genuine clinical observation. Ryan's emails demonstrated his willingness to participate in what amounted to psychological abuse of his own wife. I quickly forwarded the entire email thread to my personal account, ensuring that I had copies of all the attachments and correspondence. Then I deleted the forwarded messages from Ryan's sent folder and closed his laptop, leaving no trace that I had discovered their plans. My hands were shaking as I finished preparing my coffee, but my mind was already working through the implications of what I had learned and what I needed to do to protect myself. The immediate challenge was maintaining normal behavior while processing the devastating knowledge that my husband and his family were actively plotting against me. I had to continue going to work, participating in family events, and interacting with Ryan as if I had no idea that he was planning to have me committed for mental health treatment I didn't need. The psychological strain of maintaining this facade while knowing the truth was enormous, but I recognized that any change in my behavior could be used as evidence to support their intervention plans. That afternoon, I called in sick to work and spent hours reviewing every piece of evidence I had collected over the past months. The recorded conversations took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of what I now understood about their ultimate goals. Patricia's subtle manipulations weren't just attempts to make me feel unwelcome, they were deliberate efforts to create documentation of my alleged instability. Ryan's increased attention to my stress levels wasn't loving concern, it was evidence, gathering for their planned intervention. I began organizing all the evidence into a comprehensive digital file, creating a timeline that matched their planned intervention with the recorded conversations that proved their manipulative tactics. The contrast between their public expressions of concern and their private admissions of strategic planning was stark and undeniable. I had months of audio recordings that captured Patricia coaching Ryan on what behaviors to watch for, Ashley reporting on my supposed deterioration, and all of them celebrating their progress in building a case against me. The most powerful piece of evidence was a recording from just 3 days earlier, when Patricia had visited while I was supposedly at a late meeting. The audio captured her coaching Ryan on how to document what she called concerning incidents for Dr. Chen's records. She instructed him to keep a journal of my behavior, noting any signs of anxiety, defensiveness, or emotional volatility that could be presented as symptoms of mental instability. "Remember, darling, we're not trying to hurt Kate," Patricia's voice explained on the recording. "We're trying to help her before she hurts herself or damages your future together. But in order to get her the help she needs, we have to be able to demonstrate that there's a real problem. That means paying attention to the warning signs and documenting them properly." Ryan's response revealed how completely he had been manipulated by his mother's narrative. "I just feel guilty about watching her so closely," he admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if we're making problems where they don't exist." Patricia's reply was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that enables people with mental health issues to avoid getting help," she explained patiently. "Kate is obviously struggling, but she's too proud or too sick to admit it. If we don't intervene now, her condition could deteriorate to the point where she becomes a danger to herself or others. Do you really want to wait for another accident? Possibly something even more serious?" This conversation, along with dozens of others I had recorded, provided irrefutable proof that Patricia was deliberately manufacturing a mental health crisis where none existed. She was using legitimate concerns about mental health awareness as a weapon, twisting professional terminology and therapeutic concepts to serve her own agenda of removing me from the family. As I compiled the evidence, I also began researching the legal implications of what they were planning. In Colorado, the process for involuntary mental health commitment required specific criteria to be met, including evidence of imminent danger to self or others, or grave disability that prevented someone from meeting basic needs. The intervention they were planning didn't meet these legal standards, but I realized that they weren't necessarily planning to pursue legal commitment initially. Instead, their strategy was more subtle and potentially more effective. By establishing a professional recommendation for treatment from Dr. Chen, creating family documentation of concerning behaviors, and presenting a united front of loving concern, they could create enormous pressure for me to voluntarily agree to treatment. The threat of involuntary commitment would hang in the background, encouraging compliance with their recommendations to avoid more drastic measures. I also discovered that Dr. Chen's involvement raised serious ethical questions about her professional conduct. Her assessment of my mental state had been based entirely on information provided by Patricia and a single dinner conversation, without any formal evaluation or clinical interview. Her willingness to recommend intervention based on such limited and biased information suggested either professional incompetence or deliberate participation in Patricia's scheme. Armed with this knowledge, I began developing my own strategic response. I couldn't simply confront Ryan with the evidence and expect him to immediately recognize his mother's manipulation. Patricia had spent months conditioning him to view any pushback from me as evidence of my instability, and a direct confrontation would likely be interpreted as exactly the kind of defensive behavior they were watching for. Instead, I needed to expose their conspiracy in a way that would be impossible to deny or reframe. I needed to create a situation where their own words and actions would reveal the truth about their motivations and methods. The recorded conversations provided the foundation for this approach, but I needed to find a way to present them in a context that would force everyone involved to confront the reality of what they had been doing. My opportunity came when I discovered that Patricia had scheduled the intervention for the following weekend. timing it to coincide with a family gathering that had been planned for months. Ashley and Marcus would be visiting from out of town. Robert would be present to add gravitas to the proceedings, and Dr. Chen would arrive under the pretense of joining us for Sunday brunch. The plan was to present me with their united concerns and professional recommendations in a setting where I would feel maximum pressure to comply. The irony of their timing wasn't lost on me. They had chosen to stage their intervention during what was supposed to be a celebration of family unity, turning what should have been a joyful gathering into an ambush designed to destroy my marriage and my sense of self. But their careful planning had also given me the advance notice I needed to prepare my own surprise for the occasion. I spent the week leading up to their planned intervention making my own preparations. I consulted with an attorney who specialized in mental health law, sharing the evidence I had collected and seeking advice about protecting myself from false commitment proceedings. I contacted my employee assistance program at work to establish a record of my mental health status with an independent professional. I even arranged for my own psychological evaluation with a psychiatrist who had no connection to Dr. Chen or the Hartwell family. Most importantly, I prepared a comprehensive presentation of the evidence I had collected, organizing the recordings, emails, and documents into a clear timeline that revealed the full scope of Patricia's manipulation campaign. I loaded everything onto a secure server that could be accessed remotely, ensuring that the evidence would be preserved regardless of what happened during the confrontation. The psychological preparation was perhaps the most challenging aspect of getting ready for the intervention. I had to mentally rehearse staying calm and rational while being subjected to accusations of mental instability by people I had trusted and loved. I had to prepare for the possibility that Ryan might choose his family's version of reality over the documented evidence of their deception. I had to steel myself for the prospect of losing my marriage in order to protect my sanity and my freedom. But I also felt a growing sense of empowerment as I prepared to turn the tables on Patricia's carefully laid plans. For months, I had been the unknowing target of her psychological warfare, doubting my own perceptions and questioning my own stability. Now I had the tools and knowledge to expose her tactics and protect myself from further manipulation. The night before the planned intervention, Ryan seemed unusually affectionate and attentive, behaviors that I now recognized as scripted responses to Dr. Chen's recommendations for how to approach someone in my alleged condition. He suggested, "We have a quiet evening at home, cooking dinner together and watching movies," creating what he probably thought would be positive memories before the difficult conversation they were planning. As I went through the motions of this orchestrated evening of normalcy, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and anticipation. I was mourning the loss of the marriage I had thought we had, while simultaneously preparing to fight for the truth that might make a real marriage possible. By tomorrow evening, either Ryan would understand how completely he had been manipulated by his mother, or I would be facing the end of our relationship and the beginning of a new chapter in my life. The recordings from that final evening captured Ryan's nervous energy as he practiced the conversation he planned to have with me the next day. When he thought I was in the shower, he called Patricia to review their strategy and confirm the timing of Dr. Chen's arrival. His voice carried a mixture of conviction and uncertainty that suggested he still had doubts about their approach, but his loyalty to his family ultimately overrode his instincts about our relationship. "I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing," Ryan told his mother during this final planning call. "Kate means everything to me, and I don't want to lose her. But I also can't ignore what's happening anymore." Patricia's response was perfectly calibrated to reinforce his commitment to their plan while acknowledging his emotional conflict. "Darling, sometimes loving someone means making difficult decisions for their own good. Kate will thank us eventually, once she gets the help she needs and can think clearly again. But right now, she's not capable of making rational decisions about her own welfare. That's why we have to step in." This conversation, like so many others I had recorded, would soon be played back to demonstrate exactly how Patricia had manipulated Ryan's love for me into a weapon against our marriage. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation they had planned so carefully, but it would unfold very differently than they expected. Instead of staging an intervention to force me into treatment I didn't need, they would find themselves confronted with evidence of their own psychological manipulation and deliberate deception. As I lay in bed that night, listening to Ryan's steady breathing beside me and knowing that he was planning to ambush me in the morning, I felt a strange sense of calm. The uncertainty and self-doubt that had plagued me for months were gone, replaced by clarity about what I needed to do to protect myself. Patricia's campaign against me was about to backfire spectacularly, and the truth about her toxic influence on the family was finally going to be exposed. Sunday morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Ryan woke early and made coffee, humming softly as he moved around the kitchen in what I now recognized as nervous energy disguised as contentment. He suggested we make a special breakfast together, perhaps pancakes with fresh berries, creating the kind of domestic scene that would serve as a stark contrast to the psychological ambush they had planned for later. I played my role perfectly, chatting about weekend plans and complimenting his coffee while internally preparing for the performance of my lifetime. Every gesture, every response had to appear natural while I waited for the moment when their carefully orchestrated intervention would begin. The irony wasn't lost on me that they were about to accuse me of being mentally unstable, while I demonstrated more strategic thinking and emotional control than any of them had shown in months. Around 10 o'clock, Ashley and Marcus arrived with their usual fanfare, Ashley immediately embracing me with what I now understood was performative affection designed to establish her caring concern for the record. Marcus seemed uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact in a way that suggested he might have reservations about the plan, but lacked the courage to voice them. Their children, thankfully, had been left with friends for the day, sparing them from witnessing what was about to unfold. Patricia and Robert appeared shortly after 11, Patricia carrying a bouquet of white lilies that struck me as oddly funereal for what was supposed to be a family brunch. She moved through our house with proprietary confidence, rearranging flowers and adjusting place settings as if she were directing a stage production. Robert seemed more subdued than usual, perhaps sensing the gravity of what they were planning, but trusting his wife's judgment about the necessity of their intervention. Dr. Chen arrived precisely at noon, punctual to the minute in a way that betrayed the careful choreography of her appearance. Ryan introduced her as a family friend who happened to be in the neighborhood, maintaining the fiction that her presence was coincidental rather than central to their strategy. She was a small woman with silver hair and intense brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, carrying herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. The first hour of brunch proceeded according to their script, with conversation flowing around safe topics while everyone assessed my behavior for signs of the instability they were expecting to address. I could feel their collective attention, focused on my responses, analyzing my tone of voice and facial expressions for evidence that would support their predetermined conclusions about my mental state. Patricia orchestrated the conversation with her usual skill, gradually steering toward topics that would provide openings for their concerns. She mentioned a friend who had recently sought therapy for stress-related issues, praising the courage it took to recognize when professional help was needed. Ashley contributed a story about someone from her yoga class who had benefited tremendously from taking time away from work to focus on mental health. Dr. Chen participated in these discussions with clinical detachment, occasionally asking questions that seemed designed to evaluate my responses rather than engage in genuine conversation. When Patricia mentioned my recent kitchen accident, Dr. Chen expressed sympathetic concern and inquired about how I was handling the stress of the injury and recovery. Her questions felt like a psychological assessment disguised as friendly interest. Ryan's behavior throughout brunch revealed the depth of his mother's influence over his thinking. He watched me constantly, interpreting every gesture through the lens of concern that Patricia had so carefully cultivated. When I laughed at one of Marcus's jokes, Ryan's expression suggested he was analyzing whether my laughter was genuine or manic. When I grew quiet during a discussion of family traditions, he seemed to view my silence as withdrawal rather than simple lack of interest. The transition from brunch to intervention happened with theatrical precision that would have been impressive, if it weren't so manipulative. Patricia suggested we move to the living room for coffee and dessert, positioning herself where she could maintain eye contact with everyone present. Dr. Chen chose a seat that gave her an optimal view of my reactions, while Ryan positioned himself between me and the exit in what was probably an unconscious protective gesture. Ashley cleared her throat and began the intervention with words that sounded rehearsed despite her attempt at spontaneity. "Kate, we've all been worried about you lately. We love you so much, and we can see that you're struggling with some challenges. That might be too big to handle alone." Her voice carried false warmth that made my skin crawl, but I maintained a neutral expression as she continued her prepared speech. Patricia followed with her own contribution, speaking with the authority of someone who had spent decades managing difficult students and parents. "Darling, we've noticed some changes in your behavior that concern us deeply. The accident in the kitchen, your increased defensiveness during family gatherings, your focus on work to the exclusion of other aspects of life. We think you might benefit from talking to someone who can help you process these challenges." Ryan's participation was the most painful to witness, seeing how completely his mother had rewritten his understanding of our relationship. "Kate, I love you more than anything, but I can't ignore what I'm seeing anymore. You seem so tense all the time, like you're carrying a weight that's too heavy for you. I want to help, but I don't know how unless you're willing to accept that help." Dr. Chen added professional legitimacy to their concerns, speaking in clinical language about stress indicators and adjustment disorders while carefully avoiding any diagnosis that would require actual evidence or evaluation. She recommended immediate counseling to address what she called concerning patterns of behavior, and suggested that residential treatment might be necessary if outpatient therapy proved insufficient. Throughout their presentations, I maintained calm attentiveness, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions that demonstrated my rationality and emotional stability. My responses were measured and thoughtful, avoiding any reactions that could be interpreted as defensive or volatile. I could see their growing confusion as I failed to provide the explosive or tearful responses they had anticipated. When they finished outlining their concerns and recommendations, I took a deep breath and delivered the words that would shift the entire dynamic of our gathering. "I appreciate your concern, and I understand that you believe you're acting in my best interest. However, before we continue this conversation, I think there are some things you need to hear." I reached for my tablet, which I had strategically placed on the coffee table earlier, and opened the audio file containing their most damaging recorded conversations. Over the past several months, our home security system has been recording continuously, capturing conversations that I think will interest everyone here. The silence that followed was deafening as the implications of my words sank in. Patricia's face went pale, Ryan looked confused, and Dr. Chen suddenly appeared deeply uncomfortable. Ashley glanced between her mother and brother, clearly unsure how to respond to this unexpected development. I pressed play on the first recording, filling our living room with Patricia's voice from just 2 weeks earlier. The key is to make sure Ryan sees it for himself. We can point out concerning behaviors, but he needs to reach his own conclusions. Otherwise, he might feel like we're pressuring him unfairly. The audio quality was crystal clear, capturing every nuance of her calculated tone as she coached Ashley on how to manipulate Ryan's perceptions. The recording continued with Ashley's response about my supposed defensiveness and Patricia's clinical analysis of my mental state, revealing the depth of their conspiracy against me. As their voices filled the room, I watched their faces transform from confusion to horror as they realized the full extent of what I had documented. Ryan's expression went through several stages of recognition, from initial denial to dawning, comprehension to devastating realization. His face crumpled as he heard his mother's voice explaining how to document my behavior for Dr. Chen's records, how to create evidence of instability where none existed, and how to pressure me into accepting treatment I didn't need. I played several more recordings in sequence, each one revealing another layer of their manipulation and deception. The audio of Patricia coaching Ryan on what warning signs to watch for was followed by Ashley's report on my alleged deterioration. Then Patricia's discussion of long-term strategies for removing me from the family. The cumulative effect was overwhelming, creating an undeniable record of systematic psychological abuse disguised as loving concern. Dr. Chen was visibly shaken as she heard Patricia's voice describing the biased information she had provided as the basis for professional recommendations. The recordings revealed that her assessment had been compromised from the beginning, based on deliberately distorted accounts of my behavior rather than clinical observation. Her professional reputation was now at serious risk, and she seemed to understand the legal and ethical implications of her involvement. Patricia attempted damage control, claiming that the recordings were taken out of context and that her concerns about my welfare were genuine despite her methods. Kate, you have to understand that everything we've done has been motivated by love and concern for your well-being. Yes, perhaps we've been strategic in our approach, but only because we knew you would resist getting the help you need. Her words rang hollow in the face of the documented evidence I had presented. The recordings clearly showed calculated manipulation, rather than genuine concern, strategic planning rather than spontaneous worry, and deliberate deception rather than honest communication. There was no context that could justify the psychological warfare she had waged against me for months. Ashley tried to support her mother's explanation, but her voice lacked conviction as she struggled to reconcile the evidence with her previous understanding of the situation. Mom was just trying to help, Kate. Maybe the approach wasn't perfect, but the intentions were good. Her words sounded desperate even to her own ears, and Marcus remained conspicuously silent beside her. Ryan sat in stunned silence as I continued playing recordings that revealed the full scope of his mother's campaign against me. The audio of their planning sessions for the intervention, complete with discussions of backup strategies if I refused treatment, demonstrated a level of premeditation that was impossible to dismiss as misguided concern. The most devastating recording was Patricia's conversation with Ashley about the long-term implications of my treatment, where they openly discussed how extended therapy would give Ryan time to reassess our marriage and remember what kind of life he really wanted. Their speculation about divorce grounds and financial settlements revealed the true agenda behind their mental health intervention. As this final piece of evidence played, Ryan's composure finally broke. He buried his face in his hands and began crying, overwhelmed by the realization of how completely he had been manipulated by his mother. The man who had planned to confront me about my alleged mental instability was now confronting the reality that he had been the victim of systematic deception by the person he trusted most. Dr. Chen stood abruptly, clearly recognizing that her professional involvement in this situation had become untenable. I was not aware of the full context of the information I was provided, she said carefully, her clinical training helping her navigate this ethical minefield. Based on what I've heard today, I need to withdraw from any recommendations regarding Mrs. Morrison's care and suggest that she seek independent evaluation if she chooses to pursue therapy. Her departure was swift and professional, but I could see the panic in her eyes as she realized the potential consequences of her involvement in Patricia's scheme. She had allowed herself to be used as a weapon in a family conflict, compromising her professional ethics in ways that could result in serious disciplinary action. Patricia's final attempt at maintaining control was both pathetic and revealing. She claimed that the recordings proved nothing except that she had been thorough in documenting legitimate concerns about my behavior. She accused me of violating the family's privacy and trust by recording private conversations, suggesting that my surveillance activities were themselves evidence of paranoid thinking. "This is exactly the kind of behavior we've been concerned about," she said, her voice rising with desperation. "Normal people don't secretly record their families. This obsession with documentation and evidence gathering is a clear sign that you need professional help." Her attempt to reframe my evidence gathering as symptoms of mental illness was a masterpiece of projection, but it fell flat in the face of what everyone had just heard. The recordings spoke for themselves, revealing a months-long campaign of psychological manipulation that no reasonable person could dismiss as loving concern. Ryan finally looked up from his hands, his eyes red with tears and filled with a mixture of anger and betrayal that I had never seen before. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but his words carried the weight of complete devastation. "Mom, how could you do this to us? How could you make me believe that Kate was sick when you were the one destroying our marriage?" Patricia's response revealed the depth of her narcissism and her inability to accept responsibility for her actions. She insisted that she had been protecting Ryan from a marriage that was wrong for him, that my career focus and independent nature made me unsuitable for the kind of family life he deserved. She claimed that her methods might have been imperfect, but her goals were pure and her love for her son justified any tactics necessary to secure his happiness. "You're too close to the situation to see clearly," she told Ryan with the condescending tone she had perfected over decades of managing other people's lives. "Kate has been manipulating you from the beginning, using her professional skills to create dependency and isolation. I was trying to help you recognize the truth before it was too late." Ryan's response was swift and definitive, cutting through his mother's justifications with brutal clarity. "The only person who has been manipulating me is you. Kate never tried to change me or control my relationships with family. She never tried to turn me against the people I love. You've spent months lying to me about my own wife, and I believed you because I trusted you." The confrontation between mother and son was devastating to witness, years of unhealthy family dynamics finally exploding into open conflict. Patricia had invested too much in her campaign against me to abandon it gracefully, and she continued trying to convince Ryan that his love for me had blinded him to my true nature. But the evidence was irrefutable, and Ryan's loyalty had shifted, decisively in favor of truth over family loyalty. Ashley and Marcus made their escape during this family confrontation, clearly uncomfortable with the level of conflict and unwilling to choose sides in what had become a battle for Ryan's allegiance. This was the question I had been wrestling with throughout my preparation for this confrontation. Patricia's actions weren't just family drama, they constituted criminal harassment, possibly conspiracy, and certainly grounds for restraining orders and civil litigation. But pursuing legal action would mean prolonged conflict, public exposure, and the complete destruction of Ryan's relationship with his family. "The first thing we need to do is protect ourselves," I said, pulling up the security settings on our home system. "I'm changing all the access codes and security protocols for our house. Your mother will no longer have any way to enter our home without our explicit permission. The recordings will be stored on encrypted servers with copies held by my attorney, and I'm documenting everything for potential legal proceedings." Ryan winced at the mention of legal action, but he didn't object. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't a family disagreement that could be resolved with apologies and family therapy. This was a deliberate attack on our marriage that had nearly succeeded in destroying both our relationship and my freedom. We also needed to address the professional implications of what had happened. Dr. Chen's involvement in Patricia's scheme raised serious ethical concerns about her practice, and I had already consulted with an attorney about filing complaints with the state licensing board. Her willingness to recommend psychiatric intervention based on biased and incomplete information violated basic standards of professional conduct. "I've also been documenting everything at work," I told Ryan, showing him the employee assistance program records I had established. "If your mother had succeeded in having me committed, she might have tried to undermine my professional reputation as well. I wanted independent documentation of my mental health status and work performance to protect against false accusations." The conversation turned to the immediate practical consequences of what had been revealed. Ryan would need to confront his family about Patricia's behavior, and we would need to establish clear boundaries about their involvement in our lives going forward. The days when Patricia could drop by unannounced or insert herself into our decision-making were over permanently. "I don't think I can have a relationship with her anymore," Ryan said quietly, the words clearly causing him pain despite everything he had learned. "I can't trust her, Kate. After what she did to you, to us, how could I ever believe anything she says again? Every conversation, every piece of advice, every expression of concern, I'll always be wondering what her real agenda is." This was perhaps Patricia's greatest miscalculation. In her determination to remove me from Ryan's life, she had destroyed her own relationship with her son. The manipulative tactics that had worked when he was younger and more dependent on family approval had backfired catastrophically now that he was an adult with independent judgment and the evidence to see through her deceptions. The next few days were a whirlwind of practical actions and emotional processing. I met with my attorney to review the evidence and discuss our legal options, while Ryan struggled with the devastating realization that his mother had spent months systematically lying to him about his own wife. The recordings that had saved our marriage had also revealed the depth of Patricia's willingness to destroy anyone who threatened her control. Patricia's attempts to contact Ryan after the failed intervention were both desperate and revealing. She called, texted, and even showed up at his office trying to convince him that the recordings were somehow fabricated or taken out of context. Her messages grew increasingly unhinged as she realized that her campaign had not only failed, but had exposed her true nature to the son she was trying to protect. "She keeps saying that she did everything out of love," Ryan told me after rejecting another of her calls. "But love doesn't involve trying to have someone committed to a psychiatric facility against their will. Love doesn't involve months of lies and manipulation designed to destroy a marriage. What she did wasn't love. It was control disguised as concern." The family dynamics fractured completely in the aftermath of the revelation. Ashley initially tried to mediate between her mother and brother, but the evidence was too overwhelming to dismiss or explain away. Robert, devastated by the discovery of his wife's actions, began his own process of reevaluating their marriage and Patricia's influence over family decisions. "Dad called me yesterday," Ryan mentioned one evening, as we worked together to prepare dinner in the same kitchen where Patricia had discussed my need for intervention just weeks earlier. "He's been reviewing some of Mom's past behavior, looking for patterns he might have missed. He's starting to realize that this wasn't an isolated incident, that she's been manipulating family situations for years." The revelation had opened a floodgate of memories and re-examinations, with family members suddenly viewing past conflicts through the lens of Patricia's demonstrated capacity for deception and manipulation. Stories emerged of previous relationships that had been undermined, business decisions that had been influenced by Patricia's behind-the-scenes maneuvering, and family members who had been gradually isolated when they failed to conform to her expectations. 3 weeks after the failed intervention, Dr. Chen contacted me through her attorney to discuss a settlement agreement. The state licensing board investigation was proceeding, but she hoped to avoid additional legal action by acknowledging her professional errors and making financial compensation for the harm her involvement had caused. Her career was effectively over, destroyed by her willingness to participate in Patricia's scheme without conducting proper due diligence. "I never intended for things to go as far as they did," her attorney's letter explained. Dr. Chen genuinely believed she was helping a family in crisis, but she acknowledges that she failed to follow proper procedures for assessment and diagnosis. She accepts full responsibility for her professional misconduct and hopes to make amends for the harm caused by her involvement. The settlement was substantial enough to cover all of our legal costs and provide compensation for the emotional distress Patricia's campaign had caused. More importantly, it included Dr. Chen's signed statement acknowledging that her assessment of my mental health had been based on false and misleading information provided by Patricia, officially exonerating me of any mental health concerns. Meanwhile, our marriage began the slow process of healing from months of psychological warfare. Ryan had to unlearn the suspicious observation patterns his mother had taught him, while I had to overcome the hypervigilance that had developed from living under constant scrutiny and manipulation. We started couples counseling with a therapist who specialized in recovering from family of origin trauma, working to rebuild trust and communication that had been poisoned by Patricia's interference. "I keep catching myself analyzing your behavior, the way Mom taught me to," Ryan admitted during one of our sessions. "Yesterday, when you seemed tired after work, my first thought was to document it as a sign of stress, rather than simply asking if you needed support. She trained me to be suspicious of my own wife, and breaking those patterns is harder than I expected." The therapy helped us understand that Patricia's manipulation had been sophisticated enough to exploit normal relationship dynamics and turn them into weapons against our marriage. She had taken Ryan's natural concern for my welfare and weaponized it, teaching him to interpret loving attention as surveillance and caring questions as evidence gathering. 6 months after the failed intervention, we received news that Patricia and Robert were divorcing. The revelations about her manipulation tactics had apparently extended far beyond our situation, with Robert discovering years of deception about financial decisions, social arrangements, and family relationships. Ashley was struggling with her own realizations about her mother's influence over her life choices and decisions. "It's like finding out that everything I thought I knew about my family was built on lies," Ryan reflected as we read the divorce papers that Robert's attorney had shared with us. "Mom wasn't the protective matriarch holding us all together. She was a manipulator who controlled us by creating crises and then positioning herself as the solution." The divorce proceedings revealed even more disturbing information about Patricia's methods. Robert's attorney had uncovered evidence of financial manipulation, emotional abuse, and systematic isolation tactics that had been employed throughout their marriage. Patricia hadn't just targeted me, she had been controlling and manipulating her entire family for decades. As the legal and family drama played out around us, Ryan and I focused on rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. We changed the locks on our house, updated our emergency contacts to remove Patricia from all our accounts, and established new family traditions that reflected our values rather than Hartwell expectations. The security system that had saved our marriage was upgraded and simplified, recording only when we specifically activated it rather than continuously monitoring our private conversations. I had learned the value of documentation, but I wanted our home to feel like a sanctuary rather than a surveillance facility. 1 year after the kitchen accident that had started Patricia's final campaign against me, we hosted our first family gathering in our home since the intervention. Robert attended, along with Ashley and Marcus, but Patricia was conspicuously and permanently absent. The conversation was tentative at first, with everyone still processing the revelations of the previous year. "I owe you an apology, Kate," Ashley said as we prepared dessert together in the kitchen where so much had been recorded and revealed. "I let Mom convince me that you were the problem, that you were somehow wrong for our family. I participated in trying to have you declared mentally ill, and there's no excuse for that." Her apology was genuine, but the relationship between us would never be the same. Trust, once broken by conspiracy and manipulation, couldn't be easily repaired with words alone. Ashley would have to prove through consistent actions over time that she had truly rejected her mother's toxic influence and learned to form independent judgments about family relationships. Robert's relationship with Ryan was also evolving as he worked to rebuild credibility after years of enabling Patricia's behavior. He had filed for divorce and was attending his own therapy to understand how he had become complicit in his wife's manipulation tactics. But the damage to his relationships with his children would take years to repair. "I should have seen what she was doing," Robert told Ryan during one of their increasingly frequent conversations. "I should have protected you and Kate from her manipulation instead of going along with it because it was easier than confronting her. I failed as a father and as a father-in-law, and I understand if you can never fully trust me again." The rebuilding process was slow and painful, with setbacks and breakthroughs that came in unpredictable waves. Some days Ryan would catch himself slipping back into suspicious observation patterns his mother had taught him. Other days I would find myself over-explaining my actions or emotions, still unconsciously defending against accusations of instability that were no longer being made. But gradually, we rediscovered the easy intimacy and natural communication that had drawn us together originally. Without Patricia's constant interference and manipulation, we were able to develop our own traditions, make our own decisions, and build the kind of marriage we had both wanted from the beginning. The kitchen where my accident had provided Patricia with ammunition for her campaign became a symbol of our recovery. We renovated it completely, changing the layout and installing new appliances that reflected our preferences rather than anyone else's expectations. The cutting board where I had been injured was replaced with a beautiful marble piece that Ryan surprised me with on our second wedding anniversary. I wanted something that would remind us of what we survived together rather than what almost destroyed us, he said as I unwrapped his gift. We've built something stronger than what we had before, something that can't be manipulated or undermined by people who don't understand what real love looks like. 2 years after the intervention that changed everything, Patricia made one final attempt to reconnect with Ryan through a letter delivered by her attorney. She claimed to have undergone therapy herself and wanted to make amends for the harm she had caused. She acknowledged that her methods had been wrong, but insisted that her motivations had been pure love and concern for her son's happiness. Ryan read the letter once and then handed it to me without comment. We discussed it briefly, but there was no real decision to make. Patricia had proven herself capable of sustained deception and manipulation on a scale that made any future relationship impossible. Some betrayals were too fundamental to forgive, some trust too completely broken to repair. She still doesn't understand what she did wrong, I observed after reading her carefully crafted apology. She's sorry for her methods, but not for her goals. She still thinks she was right to try to remove me from your life, just sorry that she got caught doing it. Ryan nodded, his expression sad but resolute. She'll never see me as an independent adult capable of making my own decisions about love and marriage. To her, I'll always be someone who needs protection from my own choices. That's not a relationship I can have with anyone, especially not my mother. The letter went unanswered, and Patricia's attempts at reconciliation ended there. She had gambled everything on her ability to manipulate and control, and she had lost not just the battle for Ryan's loyalty, but her relationship with her son entirely. Her campaign to protect him from an unsuitable wife had cost her the very relationship she was trying to preserve. 3 years later, as I sit in our renovated kitchen writing this account of what happened, I'm struck by how completely our lives have changed. The marriage that Patricia tried so hard to destroy has become stronger and more authentic than anything we had before her interference was exposed. We've learned to communicate without suspicion, to trust without verification, and to build a life that reflects our values rather than anyone else's expectations. The recordings that saved our marriage are still stored on encrypted servers, but we rarely reference them anymore. They served their purpose by exposing the truth when we needed it most, but our focus now is on building a future rather than documenting the past. The security system in our home operates normally, providing protection without surveillance, safety without suspicion. Ryan has developed a successful business that operates independently of family connections or influence. I've advanced in my career, earning recognition for my expertise in cybersecurity and my ability to detect and prevent sophisticated attacks on digital systems. The skills that allowed me to uncover Patricia's manipulation have served me well professionally, though I hope never to need them in my personal life again. We've started our own family traditions, hosting friends for holidays and celebrations that reflect our personalities rather than inherited expectations. Our home is filled with laughter and honest conversation, debate and discussion that comes from people who respect each other's independence while choosing to build a life together. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't installed that recording system if I hadn't discovered their plans before the intervention took place? Would I have been strong enough to resist their coordinated pressure? Would Ryan have eventually seen through his mother's manipulation? Or would he have been convinced that divorcing his mentally ill wife was the kindest thing he could do? But those alternate histories matter less than the reality we've built together. Patricia's campaign against me backfired so completely that she destroyed her own relationship with her son while strengthening the marriage she was trying to end. Her manipulation tactics, once exposed, became a vaccination against future interference, teaching us to recognize and resist emotional manipulation in all its forms. The kitchen accident that started everything healed completely, leaving only a small scar on my palm that serves as a reminder of how quickly normal life can be weaponized by people with hidden agendas. But the deeper wounds caused by months of psychological manipulation took much longer to heal, requiring therapy, patience, and a commitment to rebuilding trust that had been systematically undermined. Today, as I prepared dinner in the kitchen, where Patricia once discussed my need for intervention, I feel only gratitude for the technology and instincts that allowed me to protect myself and my marriage from her toxic influence. The recordings that captured her manipulation are a testament to the power of documentation and evidence in exposing lies and protecting truth. Our story serves as a warning about the sophisticated tactics that manipulative people can employ, and the importance of trusting your own perceptions, even when everyone around you is telling you that you're wrong. Patricia's campaign almost succeeded because she understood how to use legitimate concerns about mental health as weapons, how to turn love into suspicion, and how to make caring family members complicit in psychological abuse. But our story is also one of recovery and resilience, proof that even the most sophisticated manipulation can be overcome with evidence, courage, and commitment to truth. The marriage that Patricia tried so hard to destroy has become a source of strength and joy that grows deeper with each passing year, built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect that can withstand any future challenges. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.